Play at Novabet.
Hello and a warm welcome to another edition of the Irish Angle, brought to you by Novibet. As usual, I've Emma Nagle and Johnny Ward here, and we're going to chat about all things racing in advance of Christmas. Now, Johnny, Emma, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Vinny. Happy Christmas.
I'm disappointed you didn't get the memo about the Christmas jumper, but anyway, not to worry. First of all, look, we've loads of things to talk about here. Let's get stuck in, I suppose.
Busy show.
The first big one is JP. $1 million to each one of the 32 counties, the GAA. That's some contribution, isn't it, Emma?
Yes, it's incredible. Like to think of like what that money will do for especially in the smaller counties, I suppose, where there's less clubs. It's kind of like a massive Christmas gift for all the treasurers of any small GAA clubs around the country. They probably won't have to fundraise for years with it. Yeah, it was like just really massive gesture, I suppose. Kind of surprised there's a lot of negativity online about JP afterwards. But I'm not sure how you can take any negativity from a story like that, to be honest.
Yeah, well, I suppose like people seeing it, is he a saint or is he a sinner? Johnny, what do you think? It's all saint in this occasion, I think.
Well, okay, I think anyone involved in philanthropy, and I use this in the nice possible way, you always have to be a little bit wary of somebody who's massively into philanthropy. And with JP, the reason, and this has been written about in the last few days, is that like JP has done unbelievable good, but he never really gives interviews. So he's a complete mystery. And he obviously is tax resident in another country. Now, I don't actually know how JP even makes his money. So for all I know is the business he's doing and making money might be consistent with where he actually lives. And there's nothing compelling him to give all this money to charitable causes, some exceptional charitable causes, far more rewarding and far more, I suppose, deserving of it than the Gaelic Athletic Association. So I just think it adds to the mystery of the man, because he never really gives interviews, and he wouldn't be the only big owner in racing who doesn't want to talk about, like, essentially, seemingly doesn't really want to talk about how he's made his money. JP is a complex one for me because his investment in racing is incredibly important for small yards, whereas most owners, and we talk about the concentration of a few different trainers, a small number of trainers, JP has been amazing in spreading his business around so many different yards, often really sort of underperforming yards. And I think he does that out of a kind of a sort of a philanthropy, and also to try to give something back from the wealth that he's made from racing. In terms of like the way his horses kind of operate in terms of being bet on and how they're sort of campaigned, we could talk about that another day. I would say, like, he invests an awful lot of money in racing and an awful lot of money in horses and in training and in investing in horses. Like, I was absolutely staggered lately. Like, I was going through a card, I think it was one of the race meetings I was doing, and he had sent Byerly Babe to Galileo. So, like, this offers up so many questions. Like, what's JP's relationship with Coolmore that you'd send Byerly Babe to Galileo? Like, this is a kind of a decent chaser who you're sending to one of the greatest stallions of all time, who's supposed to cost 300, 500 grand, whatever it is, a pop. And this is going to be a handicapper out of Galileo. So what's his relationship with Coolmore? I suppose, how did he make all his money? What does he do day to day? Because for me, the articles that, you know, Joe Brawley's article in the Sunday Independent would have been quite striking. It certainly adds more mystery to the whole thing. But in terms of JP's kind of reputation, I think he definitely doesn't like bad publicity. No one does, I suppose. But I know I know from hearsay he's wary of bad publicity. So I would like to know what his reaction to the mixed response in the media to what is a very good gesture was, because until JP gives an interview about his life and explains how he made all his money, because it's a complete mystery, really, I think there will be questions. And that quote that was attributed to him, that he apparently said to Tony McCoy, imagine all the fish that'd be alive if they kept their mouth shut. Well, one thing, JP, fish actually have to eat like the rest of us. They have to open their mouth at some point.
Yeah, I don't know. Look, there's so many things in it, I suppose. The one that gets to me is I agree with you. Look, he is a mystery man to a large degree. Supposed to be living in Switzerland, isn't it? Domiciled in Switzerland. I note that Switzerland actually has 4 GAA clubs. They'd be little bit aggrieved that they didn't get the few quid as well, I'd imagine. So I'm sure they don't need it in Switzerland, probably.
Do you remember him as a bookmaker, Vinny?
What? Oh, I do. I remember him well as a bookmaker, yeah. And his brother stood up for him then for a number of years after that as well. in the pitch in his name. I look, he's been around forever in my lifetime, and I actually worked for him at one point in a company called Phonovation out in Dunleary. We used to be able to ring up for telephone commentaries and results on races and tips and a few other things. And I remember working from them. I remember at the time, this is going back now, say I was only a kid at the time, but my father had worked for a company called Xtel. He managed Xtel in Ireland, which was the company, the predecessor to SIS, which provides all the content into betting offices. So they used to provide the old blower system where you'd just have a little box on the wall in a betting office, and you'd hear the commentary coming in from the different races or the result of it and so on. So I remember at the time, big problem for my father all the time was trying to get telephone lines. You'd get a new betting office open, they couldn't get a telephone line. Sometimes up to 5 years it took you to get a telephone line. And the same at race courses. You'd be there at the race course, you'd need a telephone line to relay all the information back. So telephone lines were a big problem back in the day. And I remember as a kid in the office, JP arrived in, he'd the first mobile phone I'd ever seen. And it was a car phone. And then he tells me he'd 3 of them in the car, and he'd another 5 lines or something in the house at home in Martinstown. And I was saying to myself, my God, my father would kill for 5 lines. Like it could take you 10 years to get 5 lines. So there you are. He'd a way of doing things even back then. But like I say, it was only a short period I worked for him. But he was always good to me. Never did anything wrong to me, I have to say, back in the day. But just overall, Emma, like, as I say, he's incredible for horse racing, isn't he? Like if you took JP, like you talk about his philanthropy here with this money he's given to the GAA, but it's purely philanthropy in a large extent to some of the small trainers around Ireland and the UK as well. There's people who wouldn't have a horse if it wasn't for JP, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Like in fairness, like I suppose the difference between JP and other big owners is like he sends horses to nearly every trainer in the country. Like I'd love to see a list of all of the horses JP actually owns and see what the spread is. But like, I mean, some of the horses that he has in training, like I'd imagine are purely in training just to support these smaller trainers, because a lot of them really like are very low level or got at the game and they're just running away. But I'd say it's just like JP wanting to support, and he does, like, it's UK and Ireland. There'd be a lot of trainers in trouble if JP ever decided racing wasn't for him anymore, because he is probably a big part of the backbone of the industry. Like the money that he pumps into racing is staggering, I'd say. But yeah, he's just huge for racing in Ireland, and I'd say what he does will probably never be fully appreciated.
Do you know, on the other hand, Vinny, and this is the funny thing, if you ask JP 50, if you ask 50 racing trainers to come on and do an interview about like JP, like a lot of them would be reticent because they respect that he's so media reticent himself that there's almost kind of a code there. And if you look at, say, you often bring up that he bought John Bond, and JP for a long time didn't really buy pointers, but he's sort of started moving on, and he's probably evolving as an owner. But if you see the amount of race mares that he sent to Walk in the Park, now Walk in the Park stands for about 25 grand. I don't know what deal JP has, but even taking away that, the investment from the conception of that horse, so that horse seeing the racetrack, then running, the amount of money he's spending on them alone. So you can imagine, and I'm always looking at the performances of winning hurdlers of JPs in sort of beginners chases, for example, and kind of, if you did the stats on that, they'd be illuminating. But if you have this conception that JP probably gambles on his own horses, and the complexity of that in a very, very difficult game where it's very, very difficult to get on, you can kind of see why so many of his horses are well backed on certain days, because the money he invests in training and owning and breeding horses must be utterly colossal. Like he must be hemorrhaging money in terms of training fees and that aspect of the game. So I completely respect that we all want to try and make a few quid when our horse is fancied, but when you have about 6 million horses, it's not straightforward. Like,
yeah, I wonder how his Paddy Power account and that 365 accounts are getting on. Hard to see how he gets his bets on, isn't it? Or where he gets them on, or how he does it. I don't know. But look, that's all for another day, as you say. Look, we'll move on. We've loads of other things to talk about. The other one is the BHA. There was stuff in the Racing Post there last week talking about the fact that they're proposing to put a limit on the number of horses a trainer can run in a handicap in the UK. Now, they're talking about 4 being the max. This will have an effect on certain races. Obviously, there's a few of them that we know of. A couple of them at Cheltenham, a couple of the handicaps where Gordon Elliott targets some of them, and then we've other ones like the Grand National where Willie Mullins, Gordon Elliott, they tend to have all the best horses. They'll stay in chasers anyway, so they tend to run a lot of horses in those races. What you make of this, Emma? 4, is this a good idea, bad idea?
I thought it was crazy, to be honest. Just because it just seems so targeted at Gordon Elliott in particular, and I suppose Willie Mullins to a lesser degree. Like there was some stats put up, and I think in the last few years, I think like Gordon and Willie and maybe 1 or 2 trainers in the flat are the only ones who would actually be affected by this rule. I don't see how you can really limit a trainer from running horses. I can see if it was a case of limiting owners runners to 4 or 5 horses. Like, I mean, 4 or 5 horses in a Grand National is plenty for any owner, I would say. But like, if Gordon Elliott's training for 10 different owners, like, how does he tell them who can run and who can't run? It just seems a bit. It just seems very targeted on these 2 Irish trainers, which I said won't sit well. Like some of the comments from Gordon, I think he was quite measured. Eddie O'Leary probably less measured. He was saying he's going to transfer horses to Colin Bowe a week before the Grand National or something. But I think there's probably a way of doing, like, I can see kind of what they're trying to do is level it out a small bit. But they're going to do 2 things. They're going to really alienate the likes of Gordon Elliott and the Gigginstown, and they're going to dilute the quality of some of these big chases. I know that there's a lot of horses running for maybe the bigger owners like Gigginstown who are really no hopers anyway. So like if you were going to limit, I would definitely limit owners, because they can definitely decide their 5 best horses, but Gordon can't tell his 5th owner that, you can't run now because my other 4 owners are more important than you are. It makes no sense. I think there's a way of doing something like that, but this just seems like totally not thought through at all. And I presume it's going to be brought to the English trainers to get their opinions on it, who I'm sure will probably want it to come in so that they can get on in the Grand National as well. But I think it's a terrible idea.
Well, the Grand National looks like that's probably the main race we're focusing on here with it, because it doesn't apply to the vast majority of other handicaps throughout the year, both flat and national hunt. So if you focus on that Grand National particularly, there seems to be there's been a trend all the way back that whoever the leading trainer is at the moment, that they will tend to have all the best staying novice chasers in national hunt game. Like you go back into the late 1990s, it was Jenny Pittman. Then you had the early 2000s, you had the likes of Martin Pipe. I think 2001 he ran 10 horses in the Grand National. The following year, 8. The year after that, 8 again. The year after that, 7. Then into the 2000s, you had the likes of Paul Nichols. He's regularly run multiple horses in. I think he's run 6 in it on 2 separate occasions. And then in recent years, you have Gordon Elliott and you have Willie Mullins. But it's cyclical, is it, Johnny? This is something that's not a major problem for the UK. And on top of that, the other thing with this is that they've tried to make the Grand National a far safer race by making all sorts of amendments and changes to it. And the class of horse running in it is better, which helps for that, I presume, rather than having, really bad horses in it are more likely to pick up injuries, you would have thought. So having it that the very best trainers training the very best horses can't necessarily all run in the Grand National is maybe it's going to be backfire on them somewhat if that's what they bring in.
Yeah, like I remember Michael O'Leary being on the Late one time, and he was asked, like, is the customer nearly always right? And he said, the customer is nearly always wrong. And I thought it was one of the best lines I'd heard. And for me in racing, the BHA is nearly always wrong. It's dealing with problems that it's like the foundation of the house is completely banjoed, or the car, the engine is completely banjoed, and they want to just repaint it, and hope for a different result. Problems in British racing are massive. Like, they are so big, really threatening the future of the sport. And the BHA, I think, lacks any sort of confidence in terms of what it's doing here. What I kind of relate to what Emma is saying here. I'm not mad on trainers having loads of runners in say in the Tri-Town. Like, it's not Gordon's fault at all, but And I completely respect Gordon having all those runners to Troytown. If I were a trainer, I'd do the same thing. But we've gotten to a situation where there was probably a lot of negative publicity around the race. And in terms of the Irish dominance of Britain, I think this is another attempt at the BHA to kind of hurt the Irish dominance, the same way that it stopped low grade horses coming over post COVID, which was complete nonsense, really, because it was basically, in my view, was scared of all the low grade races that Irish trainers were in, and like Gordon in Perth and so on and so forth. And again, it's just an example of the BHA. I suppose really exhibiting the insecurity that pervades British racing at the moment, and it is cyclical. I think it will change. Like, Gordon and Willie, you and I, we're not going to be around forever. Whatever, it will change. But I thought, I suppose, Henry de Bromhead was quite good the way he spoke about it. Eddie O'Leary was probably a little bit too honest on it, because Jigginstown would definitely be affected by this. But again, I don't think it's a workable solution at all, to be honest.
And just on that, do you think the IHRB are going to follow suit? Because it's far more of an issue in Ireland than it ever was in England, or is ever likely to be in England, I suppose. So,
well, I think what Emma said there, like you'd have to make it an owner issue, and then you bring that into the flat game as well, so where the owner can only have, in any particular race, the owner can never have a certain amount of horses, and also you'd have to phase that in, because you can't be buying horses in 2023 and then be told in 2024, well, sorry, you can't run a load of horses that you just paid 400 grand for as a store. Like, so they'd have to phase it in, but things happen very, very slowly in Ireland compared to Britain, which is probably not ideal either.
Yeah, what do you think, Emma? Just looking at it, like, we take some of those handicaps in Galway, for argument's sake, just comes to the top of my head straight away. Aido McGuinness, sure, he'll have half the field in some of them. He's built a yard around having horses in those mile handicaps. That's what his whole stable is. So then you get to a stage where you're telling him he can only run 4. That's a bit of a mess, isn't it?
Yeah, I think like it would make an awful lot more sense if it was the IHRB came out considering this, because like it's not really an issue in Britain at all, apart from like the Grand National, like you said, maybe 1 or 2 other big handicaps throughout the year. So like if the IHRB were seriously considering it, you could kind of understand it, but I still think it would be the wrong way to go about it. Like I have absolutely no problem with a trainer having 20 runners in a race if they're all different owners, or there's most of them are spread out between different owners, because the owners send them these horses, they have to find them the opportunities to run. And if they all seem to happen to suit their same race, so be it. I think maybe like one possible way is maybe like if you really wanted to, like even let's say if they decided to limit the owners to 5 runners in a race, let's say like the Troytown, but like maybe that should only come into effect then if a race fills, because like if Gordon didn't have the 15 runners in the Troytown, there would have been 7 or 8 runners. I mean, leave him run them all if there's no one else wants to run. But maybe if the race is full, only leave Gigginstown 1-5. That's probably one way you could do it. But yeah, I mean, like I think there is probably something the IHRB could do, which would work without really affecting, like, I just don't think it's fair the way they're doing it. But I think like you should probably be trying to build up the smaller trainers rather than trying to tear down the big trainers as well. Like a series of races for smaller trainers would be a better idea than stopping Gordon Elliott from running all these horses that he has bought and trained for years. It does. So yeah, I thought it was absolutely bizarre, the whole idea of it.
The Munster National, Vinny, was more pronounced. Like, so Gevre won that, and like I think something that shouldn't be lost on the narrative as well is Gevre won that race under Ricky Doyle. Ricky like has obviously made his name in nationals, but to get an opportunity on a horse that was 6-1 for Gordon in the Munster National. But if Gordon hadn't run anything in that race that day, Henry had a runner, Joseph O'Brien had a runner, Eric McNamara had a runner, and John Ryan had a runner. There would have been 4 runners if Gordon decided I'm not going to support this race.
Yeah, that's the big issue, isn't it? There isn't enough horses in Ireland to go around that aren't the outside of those top yards. That's the issue, isn't it? There isn't enough of them. Certainly not in high grade handicap chases or handicap hurdles or whatever. Literally all the top horses are all in those main 2 yards, and maybe Gavin Cromwell and Henry de Bromhead as well. You take them out of it, and there's nobody else left to run. They don't even enter horses in these races most of the time. Anyway, we move on. Next thing I wanted to talk about was Tony Martin. There was a case last Thursday, we found out the result of this case about a horse called First Man, which had won in Dundalk back in January. I don't know whether you're both familiar with this. I wrote a blog about it this morning. It's a very unusual case, in my opinion anyway, that the horse is declared to run on a Monday. The race is on a Wednesday. On the Tuesday, 2 vets attend that horse and issue him with basically the 2 different vets, both give him medication for arthritis, and basically used for arthritis, stuff called cartrophen. And then one of the vets also gives him a painkiller as well. You'd wonder, if you declare a horse on a Monday to run on a Wednesday, and you find that he's not well on the Tuesday, which seems to be the case, there was obviously something wrong when 2 vets had to come to him. You'd think he wouldn't run on the Wednesday, but sure enough, he ran on the Wednesday anyway. And he gets well back 9-4 into 13-8, and he hacks up. And then after the race, we find out that he's tested positive for a different substance altogether that wasn't contained in either of the stuff the vets gave him the previous day. Stuff called lidocaine was a prohibitive substance on race day, and he had 20 times what the screening limit is for that. What do you think, Johnny? This is a very odd case, is it?
It's a very troubling case, really. Like, I would implore anyone listening to read your blog, Vinny. I think in terms of journalism and racing, there aren't enough journalists anymore, and people are afraid to kind of say stuff. I think your blog is very, very good in terms of dealing with some of the issues, and you're not afraid to confront, to simplify this matter as well. Because, like, I opened up the email from the IHRB the other day. I think this came to 12 or 15 pages or something. The report on this, and I mean, I'd almost just say in the context of what's happened with some of the IHRB cases, this is a very, very troubling case, because this kind of inability to prove, it's sort of the same with all the Luke Homer stuff. Luke Homer, with the horses that were found positive in his under his care, kind of, he went out of his way to kind of suggest how this could have happened, but he couldn't prove himself how it happened. And it's the same here with Tony Martin, in the sense that he sort of said it could have been contaminated bedding at the racetrack or whatever, and they found that wasn't the case. And I don't know, he's gotten a 2-year suspended sentence of 6 months. So if he reoffends in, I suppose, that 2 years after the 6 months, he'll immediately be punished and banned for that. But it's I mean, there are an awful lot of questions arising from this, to be honest. And I'm actually almost afraid to talk about it, because I don't know. I actually don't know what to say beyond what's written in your blog, because it's a very unsettling case.
Yeah, well, look, there's several things here. As I say, the first thing is, as you said, about the report on this case that was issued by the IHRB. It goes to whatever, 12 or 15 pages. This is the same every time. It takes the likes of me hours to go through those, because there's so much information in it. Some of it is waffle, and some of it is all sorts of different things about so-and-so said something that is somewhat irrelevant in the large scheme of things. You're trying to pick through it to find what are the real bones of this, what really went on here. And again, as you say, what ends up happening, but this seems to be the case for me anyway, in the vast majority of these, is we get no satisfactory conclusion. They cannot find out how that horse ended up having 20 times the screening limit for lidocaine in its system after the race. We are none the wiser now than anyone was when that horse was going down to the start in Dundalk on the 18th of January. So that for me, this seems to be a constant with it, that we can never get to the bottom of what the hell is going on. The other thing is that it looks as if, now it's not absolutely certain, but it does appear as if that horse received that lidocaine. Somehow it got into his system at the racecourse. Now, Tony Martin tried to find out if he'd any more lidocaine at home in his yard, that had other horses been treated for it the previous month or whatever, and couldn't find anything. Also, seemingly lidocaine is something that is used. I don't know much about this. This is the other thing is, like, look, I know from my local pub, never mind anywhere else, that the publican will tell you that he can see on big nights now over Christmas, and that he'll be able to tell you, there was a load of them in last night and they were on the white powder or whatever. It seems to be everywhere. It's almost like alcohol at this stage in Ireland, that there's cocaine everywhere. The government doesn't seem to be able to sort that one out either. So I suppose we can't expect the IHRB to be on top of that. But if that's a case, that, you know, someone was taking cocaine, that could contaminate the sample for the horse and everything else. Perhaps that's what happened. I don't know, but they can't prove it one way or the other. So how do you get to a point here where we know what's actually going on? Because it's extremely frustrating. Obviously very frustrating from the IHRB point of view, but just as a racing fan, to be able to be here, to be able to go and have a bet in Dundalk next week, hoping that you can the only way I can have a bet is I open up the form and I study the form of all the horses, and I come to a conclusion that I think that one will beat that one and whatever else, and he's a good price, so I'm going to have a bet on him. But when you've all these things going on in the background, it makes it a really difficult sport, doesn't it? Just like you don't have that in other sports generally. Like you take the Premier League soccer, which the bookmakers love because it's so predictable, I suppose, to some extent, and they know that people will bet on. There's only three options: it's a win, a draw, or a loss, or whatever. Whereas horse racing, they seem to be steering away from that a bit. You can see with the bookmakers, their anti-post betting. We talked about that last week. They don't seem to want to be interested in that anymore for horse racing for the likes of Cheltenham. They don't really take it seriously anymore. It's just a PR tool is all it is for them. So the bookmakers themselves have realized that it's not a sport where you can actually take it seriously from a bookmaking point of view anymore, because if someone has a marked card here, you can take huge advantage of the bookmaker, so they're not that keen on it. But just from a sporting point of view, the main thing horse racing does is betting. That's what it's all about, is the betting side of it. It's where all the revenue comes from. Everything to do with it is to do with betting. So you have to make that as clean as possible. And unfortunately, this shows again that it's not as clean as we would like it to be. Emma, what do you think just about this case, or just in general? Like, as I say, I find it very unusual here that a horse that was due to race on a day had to be given medication the day before for whatever was wrong with him. We're presuming it's something to do with his joints, that he was as stiff as a poker. Perhaps, I don't know, that he had to get two different vets in to give him treatment the day before. That'd be a very unusual thing, I'd imagine.
Again, it wouldn't be too common, I'd say. To be honest, I don't know a whole lot about the drugs which the vet test administered to the horse. I presume they were safe to race on, which is why he was being treated the day before the race. But yeah, I mean, like you were saying, kind of more questions than answers, but it kind of seems to be the reoccurring theme in all IHRB investigations. And like Rhoda McNally's probably unlucky. He seems to be the only one they got to the bottom of. Like, it's 20 times, like you'd say something, and maybe if it was traces of this lidocaine, which, like you said, is used in cocaine or something, like you were mentioning, like that, you'd kind of imagine then it could have been environmental contamination. Now, like Tony Martin, like in your blog, you kind of highlight that he seems to have gone to great lengths to see how this environmental contamination could have came about, but kind of like every case that we probably talked about on this podcast gone before, there's just kind of it never really seems to get to the bottom of it. And like you were saying, like on a sport where betting is probably the main source of revenue, it's not a great look for the public, because it's hard to have confidence in kind of ruling body of a sport when nearly every drugs case seems to go to kind of the not being solved pile.
Yeah, I think as well, Vinny, the IHRB is probably very stretched at the moment. That's the feeling I get from it. And it was noted that missing identity case in Killarney, that basically obviously the wrong horse ran. This is a really messy case. So the wrong horse wins the race. It's not that right horse. So that for bookmakers, that's a complete mess. And funny enough, the bookmakers probably, I suppose the bookmakers online didn't even know. They've completely to what you're saying here. Racing's becoming so down the list in terms of bookmakers. They probably didn't even know that horse in Killarney, that Johnny Fiend trained, was the wrong horse, which is an honest mistake. But the IHRB is probably stretched in terms of resources. There's so many race meetings on now, and these cases just keep on coming up and coming up and coming up. But in Ronan McNally's case, and I'm not Ronan's from the north, and whataboutery has kind of been a part of the north for a long time. But like, Jesus Christ, for what Ronan got compared to what others got, there was no suggestion whatever that Ronan was involved in any prohibited substance or whatever to his horses. It was more of an integrity issue. And what Ronan got compared to other cases, it kind of does baffle me a bit, to be honest.
Yeah, but just coming back to this last thing about this is, we had Viking Horde down in Tremor 2018, and it was found that it looks almost certain that he was nobbled in the stable yard. And of course, at the time, there were no CCTV cameras in stable yard, so you couldn't prove who did it, but it looks like it was done in the stable yard, that the horse was nobbled to lose. And then we move on, 5.5 years or over 5 years later, and we have a case in Dundalk where it looks like drugs were given to a horse, or a horse got contaminated with drugs. So that meant that there were prohibitive substances in the stable in some way, whether it did turn out that Tony Martin's original assumption that it may have come from contaminated bedding, perhaps he was right. I don't know. But let's say he was right or he wasn't right or whatever happened. But whatever way you look at it, there's a strong chance that there was a prohibitive substance in the stable that horse was in Dundalk. How does it get in there? Like you talk about the under-resourcing or whatever, or being stretched, the IHRB, but according to themselves, they've an average of 6 security officers in attendance at each race meeting. They now have 500 CCTV cameras in stable yards around the country. Like, it's the same in my blog. You can't get a bottle of water through the airport security in Dublin Airport, or anywhere else for that matter, anywhere around the world. They can stop you bringing stuff through. How come people are still able to bring whatever it is into a racecourse stable yard? It's like, what do we need to do here? Strip search them or something on the way in, or what needs to be done here? How do you solve this problem, Emma? Like you go to you have a stable lass's card, haven't you? So you go regularly to the races, into the stable yard. What is the problem? How could you get in lidocaine or whatever else if you were going to God knows what race meeting?
I mean, I suppose you could. Like, you're not getting searched on the way into the stable. Yeah, you just scan your pass and you walk in. Whatever's in the bag could be in the bag, I suppose. But there's been like a few changes in like to stable yards. Like a couple of years ago, you could actually use a syringe to give a horse water. You could just squirt it back their throat, but they've stopped that. You're not allowed to bring any syringes into the stable yard anymore, which I suppose is a fair enough thing. But to be fair, like what Johnny was saying is right. Like, it is a tough job, the IHRB, because a lot of these cases are very hard to prove. But like you were saying, like with all the CCTV, which has been kind of recently installed in all the stable yards, like you'd think that there would be some kind of trail of evidence for something like this. Like if the bedding was contaminated, how did it get contaminated? Like, just look who's going in and out of the stable throughout the night in Dundalk. Surely there might be some kind of a clue there. But yeah,
I think with the bedding being contaminated, what they're thinking is they were reusing bedding. That there was bedding would have been used, say, the week before at Dundalk, and they were bagging it up and then giving it back to them the following day. There you go, there's fresh bedding, when it wasn't actually fresh bedding. No, but seemingly that's not the case by all accounts.
That would be a worry in general as well. I don't think trainers would be too happy with reused bedding inside in the stable. There could have been any kind of horse there the week before.
Yeah, absolutely. But look, there you are. Look, we're not going to solve this now, but it's an ongoing thing, isn't it? It's just we never seem to get to the bottom of it, which is very disappointing. Look, moving on. Christmas is coming. Probably some of the best outside of Cheltenham for me anyway. National Hunt wise, it's some of the best racing you'll see. What's piquing your fancy, Johnny? What are you really looking forward to? Leopardstown, Kempton, Chepstow?
Yeah, I mean, I see Allaho has been back to go for the King George. I'm definitely looking forward to seeing him. I suppose I'm looking forward to seeing some of Nicky Henderson's horses come out as well, if that is the case. And I'm actually really looking forward to the Racing Post on Christmas Eve, where you get all the race cards. My favorite day of the year to buy the paper and see on irishracing.com all of the list. So you have all of Christmas Eve, Christmas Day to look at the cards, and have that paper as well, and just have your 2 days. I find Christmas quite boring, to be honest, so I love watching I love looking at form and seeing what's going to happen. It's a good opportunity as well for the third choice riders, I suppose, go up to Down Royal on the 26th and to get good rides. And it is a magic time of year, and hopefully, I think the weather looks like it's going to be pretty, it's been going to be pretty dry and relatively mild in Ireland. So it looks like we're going to have good National Hunt winter ground, and hopefully some clashes. It's interesting. A fella said to me lately, he said he finds the midweek cards more interesting than the weekend cards in ways now, because there's so many odds-on shots run at the weekend, and so many uncompetitive races. And I hope, like with all these grade ones that we have some competitive racing, because I genuinely don't think run like 4 and 5 to 1 on shots running in successive races across the two jurisdictions is particularly interesting, to be honest, anymore. So I hope we've competitive racing. We're really looking forward to it.
Yeah, so there's going to be some crackers, I think. I don't think there's going to be. Well, look, it depends on the way it all falls, I suppose. In the end, like I was looking forward to that King George, Allaho, and Jerry Colomb. But Jerry Colomb now, Gordon is talking about maybe not sending the horse, which is a little bit disappointing. But you still got the likes of Shishkin, the real whacker, Brave Man's Game, won it last year. There's some great stuff, isn't there? I was looking at that Racing Post Novice Chase on St. Stephen's Day in Leopardstown, looking at the entries for that. Facile Vega, American Mike, Gaelic Warrior, Blood Destiny. That's only a few of them. There's dozens more in those races at this stage. Emma, you must have loads of them picked out. Have you already?
Yeah, I can't wait for the 2 week, I suppose, Gold Cup kind of horses coming out. Like the King George and the Savills are probably the two that are I'm most looking forward to. Like you were saying, the King George, Jerry Clum might go, but like there's Allaho coming back. Brave Man's Game, can he get back to form? Then the Savills, you're probably going to have Gallopin Des Champs and Fast or Slow facing off again, and maybe Gentleman's Game and Jerry Clum thrown in there as well. So yeah, I think there's so much, and it's such a kind of a busy period. I like Christmas. Or I like just kind of. I actually before watching the racing at home, to be honest, than going racing around Christmas. I might go maybe 1 or 2 days, but there's nothing better there than Stephen's Day, and you're having like the turkey sandwiches, and watching all the racing. It's kind of non-stop all the way through the day. It's probably one of the best times of the year.
It
Yeah,
is to be fair now. If you do go racing like on the 26th or that, and I found this, Vinny, and you can relate to this. The buzz in Leopardstown, people have just been like kind of cabin fever, waiting to get out of the house, and you have your hot whiskies, and there is a great kind of vibrancy to that meeting. And I would reiterate there what Emma's saying, that the Savills in terms of Mouse and Martin Brassil clashing against Willie Mullins, that's going to be very interesting. But like if you can go racing if you haven't been racing in a while, get out over the winter. Get out of the Christmas. It's brilliant atmosphere. And Limerick are phasing out their meeting a bit this year as well to try to stretch the crowds from the 26th onwards. And so they've rejigged the fixtures a little bit in terms of the big race and all that. But brilliant time to go racing.
Yeah. Don't forget Down Royal as well. There's always one or two punted in Down Royal on Stephen's Day, or Boxing Day for them, I suppose, officially. Yeah, but look, it's going to be a fantastic few days. I really look forward to it. One thing I do want to mention before we go as well is just in case anyone is waiting on their Irish Racing yearbook to come in the post, because I've had quite a few people on to me in the last week. I'll just let you know, we have nothing to do with that. It has nothing to do with irishracing.com. It's produced down in Kilkenny. So blame the postman, blame whoever, but it's not us. We have nothing to do with that. So you can contact them. If you look it up online, I think it's irishracingyearbook.com. You'll find telephone numbers there, because I pointed a few other people in that direction to get in touch with them. So there you go. That's one thing. Well, look, I hope you both have a very happy Christmas. I hope everyone watching has a very happy Christmas and wins a few quid at some point along the way, or backs a winner at least. And do gamble responsibly if you are having a bet. And we won't be back now till probably early January. But we'll be back and we'll have a chat about all the stuff that happened over Christmas and the start of the new year. So Merry Christmas. Have a great time. And we'll see you all again soon. Bye for now.